When I spotted this Depression era vanity, or maybe it's just a writing table, at an estate sale a few weeks ago, I instantly fell in love. It's got such beautiful lines with its curvy spindle legs, some gorgeous mahogany veneer across the top and sides, and just a really fantastic traditional feel. Unfortunately, the finish on it is a pretty good mess, and it looks like maybe there used to be a mirror or something else attached to this trim piece that sits across the back that's now missing. My plan is to strip it back, repair whatever needs it, and restore this luxurious dark wood finish back to its former glory. I suspect this table was made sometime in the 1930s because of its classic Depression era design. Like a lot of the furniture pieces made in that time period, it's constructed with a mix of various solid woods and veneers, which was a more economical approach that was pretty common at the time. Nowadays, we mainly use stains to highlight and accentuate natural wood grains, but it's really likely that this super dark color was used to unify and even camouflage all of the different materials and create the illusion of a more expensive high-end piece while actually keeping costs down. It's a pretty clever balance of beauty and budget that's really a hallmark of this era. I love that the drawer bottoms are lined with mahogany veneer, and this little sliding tray is adorable. This piece of trim was detached when I bought it, and from the screw holes and marks on the top of it, I think it was probably the base of a mirror. I'm not exactly sure how these were attached to each other, except for this one bracket in the middle on the back, but I'll figure out what all these little pockets are for later on. I usually like to start my projects with a good degrease and clean, but because of the brittle chipped veneer on the drawer fronts, I wanted to be as delicate with this whole process as possible and not make any of this existing damage worse. So I opted to go straight in with a fast-acting chemical stripper, which will also get rid of any grease or grime that's on the surface right along with the finish. It's also going to be the easiest way for me to deal with all of the curvy bits and intricate details rather than trying to use a sander or scraper in there. This circa 1850 works really fast and only needs about 15 minutes to cut through most finishes. I wasn't sure if this was an old lacquer or varnish, or if this stripper would work well at dissolving it at all, so I brushed a thick layer over just the top to see how things went before I committed to coating the whole thing. Once that was ready to go, I grabbed a flexible metal putty knife and scraped all the goop off into a piece of recycling. Next, I unscrewed these charming pulls from the drawers and tucked them, their screws, and the teeny tiny nails that keep them from spinning around into a dish so I didn't lose anything, and then brushed some more gel onto the fronts. I have no idea what kind of wood this leopard-looking grain belongs to, but it's pretty cool. While that was marinating, I went back to the top with a brass wire brush to start scrubbing the stripper off of the routered edge instead of trying to remove it with my flat blade. Brass bristles are a lot softer than steel, and they're aggressive enough to remove old finish and grime, but not so harsh that they damage or really scratch any delicate details or softer woods. The brass also helps lift the finish residue out of all the little nooks and crannies without smearing it around. It really makes this whole process of stripping detailed stuff so much easier. From there, I just kept working my way around the whole table, laying down a section of stripper, and while it was working, going back to the previous section and removing that. When I was scrubbing these spindles, I'd get to a point where the finish was all removed, but it was just kind of balled up and sticky on the legs. So I ended up pouring some mineral spirits onto a shop towel and using that just to help all that residue let go. Once I was finished stripping everything, I stood the table back up and wanted to leave it overnight for the wood to really dry back out again before I messed with anything else. And an important thing that I want to remind everyone of is if you have rags that are soaked in solvents, let them air out or off gas away from anything flammable and not just ball them up and toss them in a trash can, because they are a huge combustion risk. They can burst into flames all on their own. So I just leave mine laid out on the concrete floor for a few days. I did also get these casters soaking in a bath of rust remover before I called it a night. The next morning, everything was nice and dry, but I still had lots of scratches on the top and all the missing chunks of veneer that I needed to address. If you're not sure how to tell if your surface is veneered or solid wood, well, this missing chunk clearly exposes the thin layer of veneer. But another giveaway is on the back of the table, where you can see a distinct line separating the veneer from the substrate that it's stuck to. And if I look at the wood grain, it runs horizontally across the top, but when it reaches the edge, it suddenly changes direction. Trees don't grow like that. This chunk out of the back will be totally covered by the trim piece once I reattach it, but I still wanted to fix it, mainly out of principle, but also so that it doesn't chip any further over time. And I didn't have any mahogany colored fillers in my collection, but this walnut epoxy will be close enough, especially once I get things restained. So I just mixed up a tiny chunk of this. It's actually two different components inside the tube, and you have to knead the two colors together to start the chemical reaction that hardens it. So once I got that mixed up, I placed some here, some more on the chipped corners on the drawer fronts, and also rolled a little piece into a snake and carefully placed it into the missing piece of trim on the broken corner applique. Once the epoxy was set, I was ready to go over all of the flat surfaces with my sander to remove as many of the scratches as I could. I decided on a 150 grit sandpaper because, like the brass brush, it's aggressive enough to grind through the rough, very top layer and buff out the scratches, but not too aggressive that it's removing too much of this thin layer of wood and cutting through to what's underneath. I wasn't too worried about getting this perfect. A few of the deeper dings were still there, but we can chalk that up to antique patina and character because there's just not enough wood to sand them all the way out, but they're also not really deep enough for wood filler to hold on to. This thing is getting close to 100 years old after all. These appliques seemed a little fragile, and I'm honestly not even sure that they're wood. They might be some sort of plaster, but I didn't feel good about running my sander over them, so I decided to just pour a little bit of acetone into a jar and used another smaller brass brush to sort of refine my stripping job and get a little more stain out of all the tiny spots. I almost forgot about the trim piece since it was tucked off to the side, but I filled in all of the screw holes that were on the top of that with a little bit of regular walnut colored wood filler instead of the super heavy duty epoxy, and sanded all that smooth as well. Now that I had everything stripped back to its bare-ish state, you can really see all the different wood tones and colors that original dark stain was hiding. The yellow drawer fronts, the red mahogany, and I think all of the trim around the top and legs are actually maple. They might be birch. That's still got a lot of that dark stain soaked in. So a fresh layer of another dark stain color is in order to get everything looking like it belongs together again. This is a water-based wood stain in a dark walnut color that's a really nice, almost chocolate brown. I've used it on a few different projects, so I know that it's gonna do what I want it to do on here. It's also really easy to build up with a few different coats if you need more pigment on a particular section. I poured some out into a tray and then used a big painting sponge to apply a generous amount across the top. Since it's water-based, it does dry a lot faster than traditional oil-based stains, so I like to put on a very liberal coat, especially when I'm doing a larger area like this. And then I just used a blue shop towel to immediately wipe back any excess, always keeping things moving in the same direction as the wood grain to avoid any streaking. I did end up switching over to a smaller foam brush to get into all the details. And again, I just kept working my way around the whole desk, section by section, until I had the whole thing coated in a nice even layer of color. This stuff is ready to top coat after about an hour of dry time, and I decided to try something new to me and use this oil-based polyurethane in a warm satin finish. I've never sprayed an oil-based finish in my sprayer, and I've never used a warm tinted poly on a project, but I thought this was going to be the best way to get a really durable, warm wood finish on this table that will sort of bring the wood grain back to life, hold up the best over time, and be really easy to maintain for whoever its next owner ends up being. I gave the can a really good stir to get all the stuff that had settled in the bottom reincorporated, and then filtered some into the hopper of my gun. I tested out all of my spray settings on a scrap piece of cardboard to make sure I liked how things were coming out, and then moved over to the table. I tried to get a bit of a heavier coat on the top and the drawer fronts, since they're the surfaces that will get the most contact, and then went a little lighter on the sides and legs so I didn't end up with any drips. This is a fast drying formula, which, because it's oil, still takes a lot longer than the water-based products that I'm used to using. The can said this could be recoated after 3 to 4 hours, so before I went on with my day, I scrubbed all the rust and tarnish off of these casters, again with my handy little brass brush, and then used a little bit of gold rub and buff to brighten them and the pulls up just a bit. Before I sprayed on the second coat, I rubbed everything down really lightly with a super fine sanding sponge to knock back any high spots or little flecks of dust that had gotten stuck in the first layer. Usually a water-based poly will feel completely dry when it's ready to recoat, but oils can still feel a little soft or tacky, and that's okay. It just means you have to be extra careful that you remove any traces of dust, because they will hang on to there really well. I did end up spraying on a third coat before I was totally happy with how the sheen was looking, and then left it to start fully drying and curing for a few days. Okay, so after looking at the old holes in the bottom of this trim and the pockets on the back of the desk, I think there were originally some hanger bolts and then some sort of washer and nut situation that held these pieces together. So I went digging through all of my spare parts, found what I needed, and got this put back together. I am so excited about how this table turned out, but before I give you the full reveal, let's have a quick look back at where we started. Gorgeous lines and a dark, rich wood tone, but chipped, badly scratched, and not anything that most people would want to showcase in their homes. But here she is now. She still has all her original character with a few dents and marks that show her age, but now she's something to be proud of again and is well protected for another couple of generations to love. Thank you so much for watching along today. I'll catch you all next time.